Welcome to Believer's Life Ministries Radio with Pastor Brian Veach, teaching from God's Word on how believers can find victory and healing, living their lives in Jesus, and creating disciples along the way.
Hello and welcome to Believer's Life Radio. I'm Pastor Brian Veach, and today we're here with Ed Small with Naranon. Naranon is a group that meets with families of addicts, both drugs and alcohol, and they meet on Monday nights at 7 p.m. at Mosaic United Methodist Church, which is located at 8008 St. Andrew's Church Road. To reach them, let's go ahead and I'll give you my prayer line number, which is 502-727-9706. So Ed, welcome back to the show, and I wanted to maybe start off the show with a question. So how do you deal with there's so many different circumstances that would walk into one of your groups. Some people have addiction, they're in recovery now. Some people have loved ones that have passed. They all need your help. How do you deal with so many different circumstances in one meeting?
Well, it depends on the situation, but I will tell you that one of the things I need to stress is that when people come to our meetings, our goal is to be there for them, and this is a safe place for them to talk about what's going on. We do not tell someone what they need to do. Our goal is to try to maybe share our experience, strength, and hope, and we try to do that from different aspects. At the same time, as I said, our goal is we don't tell them what to do. I mean, that's like, I don't think any of us in this room like somebody telling us what we need to do, especially when you already have some pretty strong convictions in your head and heart. So, and for me to go in there and tell you how you need to treat and deal with your addict or alcoholic is not my place. My place is to let them know what works for me. For example, one of the things when someone's in recovery, and I really need to stress one thing about recovery that I think very few people hear. If you have the opportunity to watch someone go through recovery and for them to pour their life into it, it's an amazing, beautiful thing. It's amazing to see someone who is chemically someone else slowly become the person that you once knew. And the person, in my case, was the person that I fell in love with. So that's a beautiful thing. But I will also tell you that there's a lot of different emotions and different things. For example, years ago when I did the Alateen, probably the youngest child I ever dealt with was only 7 years old. She had already been institutionalized twice, and she was a cutter.
Oh.
So, and people ask me, say, how do you relate to that? Well, I guess because I'm simple-minded. As a kid, I can go back to where I was as a kid, but the emotions are the same whether you're an adult or not, or a child. Let me ask you this. How's it feel to be lied to?
It feels terrible.
How's it feel to have someone promise you something and not fulfill it?
Again, it lets you down. Absolutely.
That's how we relate to them, because that's exactly what has happened to them. They've had mommy or daddy promise them, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I promise I'm not going to do this anymore, and I'm going to show up to your ball game and not show.
Yeah.
Or intentionally lie. And there's times that they'll catch them in a lie because their drug has become the most important thing in their life. Now, I will also tell you that we need to stress here, I've never met an addict in my life that woke up one day and said, I want to be an addict. It's never happened. Circumstances that I don't understand, circumstances that I don't need to understand has happened in their life, and it's my job as a Christian to be able to deal with them. If they're in my family, I don't have to deal with every addict that's out there. That's not my job. I'm not called for that. But if something's in my path, then that's something that I'm going to have to deal with. At the same time, as I had mentioned last week in the scriptures, there's also other scriptures that Paul talked about in Galatians, where in the 6th chapter of Galatians, he's talking about how we should be helping each other. But what a lot of people fail to realize is, in that 5th verse, he tells us very plainly, but we should each carry our own burdens. I'm not supposed to take your burdens off of you. We're supposed to work through our burdens. It's not my job to fix you. I can encourage you and pray for you all I want, but it will never be my job to fix you. That is between you and God. And the amazing thing is that God many times has stepped in and taken care of things that other people thought was impossible.
Absolutely.
Give you an example. We're at a Christian radio station. How many of you remember the name Mylon Lefevre? Heroin addict, 17 years. He admitted that. Mylon Lefevre was one of the biggest names in Christian rock music.
Really?
Absolutely. You ought to hear, he's passed within the last year or so. But the ministry that he provided was something that other people couldn't relate to because he had been on both sides. So, you know, the Lord uses those situations in the same way that I pray that some days he uses me in spite of me because like everybody else, you know, if I'm having a bad day, I might get in my own way. You know, I could get in the Lord's way. Everybody does.
Absolutely. I tell people quite often that people get mad at God. Why did God do this to me? I say, God did not do that to you.
Right.
But God can use you since you're already there. In your case, he didn't plan for you to go through this, but since you're there, he's using you to be a great sense of support and ministry for everybody there. So he's using you right where you are. He'll use you right where you are.
That is my prayer. And like you said, it's a matter of our faith is very much like this walk from the example of it really starts at the point of surrender. Mm-hmm. I can't do this anymore. How many of us have been there? Yeah. You know, for one way or another. Now, prayerfully, it's not as dramatic or catastrophic for some people.
Is getting the person in recovery to the point of surrender how you really introduce or maybe reintroduce Jesus to them? Because some of them may not be Christians, but some of them are.
Absolutely.
And, of course, the 7-year-old who cut themselves, they're not Christians. So somehow, how do you introduce Jesus to these people or the families? The families might not be saved either.
Well, one of the things that within the Naranon program, I must also say that it is not a religious program, even though those are based on the 12 steps. The 12 steps are based on those 12 biblical principles. But for me, I had a cousin years ago that was a recovering cocaine addict. And he had gotten into some trouble and he was selling it. But to make a long story short, he had got in recovery and accepted Christ and even went to Russia as a missionary at one point.
Okay.
So, but he had told me one day, and it always stuck with me because we were both on the same plane, so to speak. And he told me, he said, you know, it's my job to try to, as a Christian, to try to help them with their life, and then hopefully salvation will follow. And by that, what I mean is, I'm not going to do any good if I don't befriend somebody first in some way, shape, or form. They at least need to know that I'm a real person, I'm not blowing smoke, and that I'm trying to be a servant. Mm-hmm. If I've done that, then my prayer is the Holy Spirit's going to give me the opportunity to bring my faith into this.
I think you're right on the money there. I think people, when they're hungry, give them some food and then witness to them, and they'll listen to you.
Absolutely.
To try to witness to them when their mind is on them hungry,
Right.
They don't hear you. They just don't hear you.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right. You're right on the money there.
Right. So that's our goal. But I will tell you that there's been many people after meetings that I've been able to talk to. In fact, some of the best meetings that ever happen in the parking lot afterwards.
Really?
Because people have got together and said, you know what you said really nailed me to the wall. And I'm thinking about that really, and I've got to work with that. You know, this is an issue in my life. And we all have issues, and I don't care if it's just that, you know, somebody's obsessed with the way their house is set up. You know, you can do that in an unhealthy way too. You know, there's people that human beings can take anything to an extreme if if our minds get carried away.
It's just how we are. That's how we're wired.
Absolutely. So when it comes to dealing with those people, number one, it's being authentic and saying, you know, look, I've been there, I've done that. And every one of us has had times when we, quite honestly, because especially in dealing with addicts, what you need to understand is that there is no better con in the world than an addict in the throes of addiction, because they are going to tell you anything they can. But you also have to keep this one thing in mind. Okay. That you can't do what I do without having some compassion for the addict as well. Now, let me explain to you one thing. I have had an addict in the past explain to me, you know, have you ever tried to get somebody to explain to you what their tragedy was like, and because you couldn't grasp it? When an individual's in the throes of addiction, number one, by that I mean at this point they've lost control. At this point, they know that they're not just getting high anymore. Did anybody ever think about that? They're not just getting high anymore. They're getting high because they don't want to be sick. Multiply the flu times 10 with the aches and the pains and the cravings. Would you want to go through that? Now, here's what another one explained to me. He said, do you remember going swimming as a kid and everybody's playing in the pool? And in the midst of the game, somehow, you get held underwater? What happens? You get held underwater, what happens?
You start flailing. Yeah.
Why?
There's no oxygen.
Why?
I can't breathe.
You're panicking.
Panicking, yes.
Imagine doing that for hours at a time because you don't have your drug and you're sick. That teaches me compassion.
Wow.
I can't just hate the disease. In my opinion, I also need to be an educator, and I also need to be able to help people that I love.
Jesus did all his healing because of compassion. And that's you being like Jesus. That's good. So
in dealing with these programs and I have had a couple of people, I remember one guy, I know we're on Christian radio, but I really made him mad. And it was unintentional, but he came to me about 3 weeks later, and he said, man, you made me mad. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm sorry, I didn't. He said, I came here because I thought you were going to help me get my attic clean. You were going to tell me what to do to get my attic clean, and we don't do that. Mm-hmm. He said, when I was talking to you, you kept saying, I understand. I would tell you how bad it was, and you'd say, I understand. But you didn't tell me what to do about it. And I said, I told you that because I do understand. And the facts are, you can't change them. What happens is, generally, they're going to do one of two things. If I take care of myself and get some help for me, get out of my stinking thinking and quit catering to the whim of an addict who has no control, then it's what I need to do is just continue along those veins and not allow them to control what's going on. Here's probably the best analogy that I can think of. All of us can probably remember seeing a mobile over a baby's crib.
Absolutely. Rainbows, zebras,
Yeah.
we've all seen them.
Right. Well, an addict believes they are the center of that universe.
Oh, yes, I can see that.
But what happens when the center of that universe moves? What happens to that mobile? It's not just one piece.
No, the whole thing is rocking.
The whole thing is rocking. And that's what happens to the families. The families are trying to scatter, protect themselves, run away from, embrace, hug, fix. These are just a few things that happens in their heads. What do we do about this? In the meantime, that mobile is just going wacky doodle. But it's a perfect analogy of what's happened in our lives. So we're trying to do things to stabilize that. Another thing I joke around about, if anybody's ever dealt with an addict, is I say it's my belief that they have an invisible, emotional remote control. I see the eyes going. But here's the thing. If you've ever dealt with an addict and they're trying to manipulate you, they know what words to say.
Wow, because they know you.
If they didn't have those words, if they didn't have that remote control, sometimes it could be just a look. Sometimes it could be tears. Sometimes it could be a sob story that nobody believes, but they're going with it. And that's because their brain has been altered. In some cases, for example, meth is one of the worst, that they tell me that it takes almost 2 years to detox the brain. That's crazy.
That is crazy. Wow.
Imagine dealing with that in recovery. But God can still do that.
Oh, yes.
And He does. Mm-hmm. And He does. And there are people that I have met over the years that are successful in their recovery, and I praise God for that, because if it's just amazing to see Him work in some of these people's lives.
Is recovery an ongoing thing? So are you a recovering addict for the rest of your life, or do you get over it?
Well, yes and no. And by that I mean technically the word is no. But what happens is, remember when I mentioned about detoxing that brain, the cravings might quit over time. But every addict I've also have talked to will tell you that there's things in their life that they know are weak points. If I do this, man, that'll set me up for failure. And so they try very hard not to do that. And they stay away from that. Geography is not an answer for it, although it can be helpful, because the real answer is internal. And the old saying of, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, it's not till you get there. It's not till that surrender happens that they get that true recovery. And the blessings that they give other people in hindsight for that is amazing. And there's also different forms of recovery. There's all kinds. I mean, here in Louisville, we've got Wayside Christian Mission, we've got ARC, Landmark, all these different places. We've got the Isaiah House. Now, the Isaiah House and some other, there's a couple of them out here that are actually faith-based, and they let people know that from the get-go, and I applaud all of that. But at the same time, there's some people that I have dealt with in the past. For example, when I had an Alateen program, I remember I had a 15-year-old boy that when he swore that he was a Satanist. And I don't know if it was shock value or whatever, but my simple answer was, well, how's that working for you? And and so he just had to kind of let that go. And I didn't mean it as a cut, but at the same time, it was a reality check. Another thing that I tell people in these meetings is, and I'm not trying to make anybody mad when I do this, but I've stood in front of 40, 50 people and said, wherever you're at, I don't care where you're at. If you're 45 years old and you've been, however, I said, here's what I want you to stop and think about. If you're struggling with this idea of recovery and you don't think that people are making any sense here, using that 45-year-old example, your best thinking for 45 years has got you where you are today. Don't you think it might be beneficial to listen to somebody else who's survived this and come out on the positive side? That's the hope. It's all about breaking the cycle. It's about me in my recovery of breaking the cycle of walking on eggshells, afraid to say something because I'm afraid I'm going to trigger somebody's recovery. I can't do that anymore. I have to focus on my life, my faith, and push forward. And when I do say things that might ruffle a feather or something, I pray that it comes out of love and not anything else. I hope people understand that. That's the goal.
Absolutely. We should do everything out of love.
It's tough sometimes when your addict is in a mess.
Well,
and one of the things that along those lines, and we had already mentioned about setting boundaries. Boundaries is not something that's always easy. But another thing that I like to tell people is you have to set boundaries. There's givers and takers. Givers have to set boundaries because takers don't have any. They're going to walk right over anything that, especially if they're trying to manipulate you and get something out of you. That doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means that the disease is talking through them. The disease has got them under its control.
Do you find an addict to be, or addiction to be, more of a selfish kind of disease, where it's all about me, and I need your help for me to keep going, and everything's about me, me, me? Do you see that as a...
Absolutely. I had a very close friend who's passed away now. She was a 4-time cancer survivor. She had a son in her 40s that was full-blown addict, tried to control and manipulate and get money and whatever. And I remember her telling me that how mad he was at her because he didn't have any food in the house, and she bought him some ramen noodles. And he was mad because I don't like ramen noodles. Well, Mama's recovering from cancer, and the only thing you're concerned about is her buying food for you. What about her needs? That shows you how it can get turned upside down.
Turns upside down, exactly. Ed, can you give us a few closing thoughts?
Yes. I think one of the things we had touched on earlier was the grief situation.
Yes.
And that I had mentioned that some people will grieve long before the individual dies. But in addition to that, back before COVID, when things got really crazy, we were dealing with that, and was the beginning of the fentanyl deal. And my program, or our program, had really raised. I mean, we were like 50 plus people. We was getting PA system set up, to be able to do a meeting. And during that time, sadly enough, we lost about half of our people, and half of those parents were because they lost them to either fentanyl or some form of an opioid. And so then we we were splitting up, and I was doing a grief group for those that were dealing with the overdose death. And then we were still having our regular meetings. Now, of course, COVID killed everything, and we weren't able to have meet and all those things. But I will tell you that the grief can be overwhelming. One of the things that I have, and everybody handles that different. We don't tell them exactly how to do it. I think the biggest thing that I was doing at the time, and I have since then, I worked with hospice for a little bit to get some training on how they do some of their grief groups. And I was doing some of that. And I was doing some of it also using some TED Talks and different things on grief and getting different people's perspectives, letting people know that the only wrong grief is if you're hurting someone else because of your grief. Everything else is okay, because it's a time frame. Having dealt with what I have, and it's a situation where, yes, I feel victorious, and yes, I feel like the Lord has blessed me, but that don't mean I still don't have bad days. I can hear a song that'll take me to a wrong place. And in some cases, and I'm going to just drop this little bomb as we close, there's some cases that it turns into PTSD because of what they've lived through with their addict. And it happens. But I will tell you, and I really want to emphasize that the good Lord has not only pulled me through it, but many people through it. And he continues to, and I look forward to seeing even more people in the future. But we need to do some education. We need to continue to educate and be there. As long as we stuff it and not talk about it, it gets worse. And in my opinion, our churches have done that way too long. So we need to get out our bullhorns and say, because the bottom line is, I think any one of us in this room can stand on our front porch and throw a rock in any direction, and you're going to hit a household that's been affected by it. If you think otherwise, I'm sorry, I believe you're sadly mistaken.
It is a very prevalent problem for sure. Absolutely. So, Ed, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being here today and helping us. There's a lot of people in our audience that have family members in the throes of this. They need to know more about it. And I thank you for educating me personally. But let me remind people that Naranon is a group that helps families of addicts, both alcohol and drug. And they meet on Monday nights at 7 at Mosaic United Methodist Church over, let's see, the address is 8008 St. Andrews Church Road.
We're in PRP.
They're in PRP. If you'd like more information or you forget the address, call me. I'll give you my phone number. It's 502-727-9706. We'll get you the directions. We'll get you connected with Ed. Thank you for joining me on Believers Life Radio. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, and be blessed.
Thank you for listening to Believers Life Ministries Radio with Pastor Brian Veach. If you'd like prayer from Pastor Brian, call the emergency prayer line at 502-727-9706. 502-727-9706.